what's driving the gold rush and where is the gold investment market headed going forward? To break this down for us, we are now joined by Sachin Jain, Regional CEO India at World Gold Council, who is now joining us. Mr. Jain, thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us here on ET Now. And before we talk about demand and pricing, let's first talk about the latest announcement for your sector that came in the budget about 7-8 days ago, where the government has proposed reducing basic customs duty on imported jewellery and precious metal parts from 25% to 20% now. How do you read this development, and is this a big positive for the industry?
My first comment on the budget is that it's an extremely positive budget. It's a reflection of not just what happens in the next 12 months in our country, but also march towards Viksit Bharat 2047 and getting the fundamentals of our country in shape. So we at World Gold Council are hugely positive of what the outcome would be. Now, to your question around the reduction of import duty on imported jewelry that's coming in from 25 to 20, and I think it's a positive step, keeping in mind that in the consumption of jewelry there are various segments, and what this caters to or impacts is the very high-end luxury jewelry largely, and I think with some reduction there, it'll only ease up that Indian consumer will be at parity with what they consume globally, and in some way will still on the right conversation of competition and consumption. So hugely welcomed.
Alright, so that's as far as the budget announcement is concerned, but despite a 25% surge in gold prices that we saw in calendar year 2024, your report suggests that total gold demand rose by about 1% on a year-on-year basis in the fourth quarter. What really are the factors that drove demand uptick in the fourth quarter and for the full year 2024?
Globally, we saw that this has been a record year. We say this is a golden year for the gold business as 2024. We had a record high of consumption of 4,974 tons globally, which crossed the consumption value by almost at $382 billion. Now that's a record high of how gold performed across the world. And globally, there are 4 or 5 pillars in which this operates on. First and foremost is the investment demand, which we saw grew up by 25% last year on forms of physical bar and coin as one area, even ETFs. And the ETFs, particularly in the Western market, we saw an outflow happening in the first 6 months, but the second half of the year was very positive with about a 19-ton increment. Secondly, we saw jewelry, which overall globally has gone down by 11%, largely in China market, and almost in India we've seen a drop of about 2%. But with such a surge in pricing, it's a pretty good performance. In technology, we've seen a growth happening largely led by AI chips, which use a lot of gold, and gold becoming, as in artificial intelligence becoming more and more democratized. We foresee that this area of consumption in the years to come will grow. And lastly, and most importantly, the consumption of central banks. With all the geopolitical situation in the world, we saw central banks bought about 1,045 tons across the year, which was a big chunk. And large consumption has been about developing countries buying, and this was led by Bank of Poland. We had the China Bank of the People Bank of China that bought in the first half of the year, and then RBI continued to buy throughout the year. I mean, just to give you one number of RBI, the total buying has been about 73 tons compared to 16 tons of 2023. So with this, we've seen an overall consumption of gold being strong.
Consumption continues to remain very strong, and Mr. Jain, we get that point when it comes to global factors, but what's the situation back home here in India when it comes to demand?
And from an Indian perspective, we see the consumption of gold up by about 5%, totaling to about 802 tons of gold compared to about 761 tons last year. But if you look at the value, well, volume-wise, it's only a 5% up, and what you alluded was also the value of gold that's gone up. So we've seen an increase of about 31%, totaling about to 515,000 crores of consumption that we saw. Now, breaking it up in jewelry, as I mentioned to you, that jewelry performance has been almost at par, about 2% lower than what we saw in 2023, which with this increased consumption is about a 22% increase in value. Look at the investment demand, that has gone up by 29% in terms of volume to about 239 tons, and as a value-wise, it's a 61% up. So that's the second area. And as I mentioned to you already, that the central bank's buying continues to be strong. And one of the areas that we've seen in investment demand is on the ETF side, that we saw The AUM of ETF in January 2024 was about 40 tons, and on December 31st, 2024 was almost 54 tons plus. So about a 14 to 15 ton over a 40 ton base. So we think this product will amplify as you go into more awareness and more, people consuming ETFs.
That's the word when it comes to demand. But for 2025, by how much do you expect total gold demand to rise?
Well, our estimate still remains between the 700 to 800 ton bracket. And as you go forward into the year, a lot of the consumption will depend upon geopolitics, how the price is stable or not stable. I mean, for the fact being that if the price keeps going up, it has a negative impact on how jewelry gets consumed. So there are a lot of facets to it, but our prediction or our sort of focus for 2025, the range will be between 700 to 800 tons. And as you go forward in the year, we'll perhaps sharpen this as with more impetus coming on in certain sectors.
And Mr. Jain, do you expect the trend of central bank buying to continue this year as well? Central banks buying exceeded about 1,000 tons for the third year in a row in 2024. Will the trend continue this year?
Well, we ran a survey of the central banks in middle of the year, and as an outcome of that, over 30% of the global central banks indicated that their continuation of gold investments will be there. And as a second half of the year, we witnessed more impetus towards central bank buying. So we believe that with all the geopolitics happening, with trade wars happening, sanctions happening, all of that, there's also conversation of de-dollarization, and I think as countries become more stronger, particularly developing countries moving into a developed phase, the buying for central banks should continue.
And what's the situation when it comes to gold ETFs? We have seen gold ETF outflows over the last 3 to 4 years. How do the trends shape up for 2024, and what's the outlook when it comes to this calendar year?
So as I said, in 2024, we saw the first half of the year where the outflows continue, and particularly in the US market, in the Western markets. The second half of the year, we ended with about 16-ton addition in the global, ETF area, and so we believe that how gold has performed as an asset class will help the financial world of the Western markets to really, focus on gold as an important asset class. Now look at India, where the addition was about 15 tons over the AUM, and that's a great sign for us base which was still small, and we believe that this is going to grow much further in this year.
And what about gold jewelry purchases then? Are customers holding back jewelry purchases led by the surge in gold prices that we have seen? And could jewelry purchases rebound yet again this year?
Well, as I said that the globally we saw 11% drop in jewelry demand, but in India this drop was about just less than 2%. So it's not very significant. But clearly, if the prices go up, you see when a consumer is looking at buying jewelry, they come out with a certain budget, and if the price goes up, you can only buy that much. So we hope that this year will be slightly more stable, and if there's stability, we foresee the demand being sort of strong. And if the price is very volatile, if it goes up and down, that negatively impacts the demand of jewelry.
Mr. Jain, thank you so much for taking your time out, joining us here on ET Now and helping us decode what's the outlook going forward when it comes to gold.